Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Welcome, Pacesetters of Agribusiness, to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod, where we amplify voices from across the agricultural industry. We aggregate those perspectives and work to elevate our collective thinking around strategy execution. I'm your host, Joe Mosier, and I appreciate you tuning in today. Today's episode is going to be a conversation with Jeff Boyd, CEO of Garden City Co-op in the western high plains of Garden City, Kansas. Now, Garden City Co-op is a member-owned farmers cooperative with locations across western Kansas, and they also serve the Oklahoma Panhandle as well. Garden City has over 30 million bushels of grain storage across 20 locations and serves more than 2,000 member owners, and they're diversified into the business lines of grain, agronomy, and petroleum. Now, Jeff, as you'll hear in today's conversation, has been at Garden City for 24 years. He's been the CEO since 2018, and he's had a career path that has taken him through most aspects of the organization. We're going to talk about his career path. We're going to talk about earnings concentration risk, not just the cross-subsidization of one division making up for the underperformance of another one, but how earnings concentration from factors outside the four walls of the co-op can create some dependency risk that needs to be accounted for. We'll talk about talent management and development and the pride and strain that comes with being a net exporter of talent in the ag industry, which Garden City is. We'll talk about AI within ag and specifically the cooperative system. And finally, we'll even spend a couple minutes getting into how the co-op of the future might just be completely asset-free. Thank you for tuning in today. Before we start with today's episode, a quick reminder to like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us a review to let us know how we're doing. It's the best way you can support the show, and it doesn't cost you a thing. Thanks again for joining us today. And here's my conversation with Jeff Boyd of Garden City Cooperative. Jeff, I'd love to start today talking about some of the different ways that subsidization risk and really earnings concentration risk can show up in co-ops. You know, the obvious topic that we've spent time on the show on before is really the challenge within any diversified entity, including cooperatives, where perhaps underperforming divisions or departments are subsidized via the outperformance of their peer divisions and departments. And I don't think that's a problem if it's over a short period of time to adjust for market conditions, but when it becomes systemic, it's more of an issue. So that's an obvious place that we could go. But I think something maybe more interesting is panning back and thinking about the cooperative at an enterprise level and how this might show up. And one of the specific examples, of course, is when a cooperative that's part of a federated system, federated cooperative system, is the beneficiary of strong patronage from the federated co-op. Oftentimes, even within that co-op can be from a single or a couple of divisions. But over time, a local cooperative can see a lot of growth and investment that's being fueled by the earnings from that larger partner. And perhaps they lose focus or have less focus on local earnings as a barometer of their success. And so I'd love to maybe start off today by getting your thoughts on that, if that's an incomplete assessment of the challenge or what you as a chief executive, how you think about that type of challenge within your organization.
No, that's Joe, that's a great question. I think, for us at Garden City Co-op, we've seen all kinds of sides of those models. For the Garden City Co-op, when you look at it from an enterprise level, we've been in all kinds of different businesses over the tenure of this business. We've been in feed, we've been in feedlots and swine production. Way, 100 plus years ago, we were in some cane seed oil production around here that was used in the war. And so the company has had a history, and my predecessor had a great saying of how he would manage this from an enterprise level is you cut the arm off before it destroys the body. And we were good about that in our history of looking at it from an enterprise of saying, hey, this is creating value for our farmers or our members at this point in time. It's no longer doing that. We need to change something. We need to evolve. We need to move forward. And subsidization gets questioned during those processes and when that happens. But you got to stay disciplined and be willing to make some of those hard decisions. And to your point, at times, patronage becomes a piece of that decision becomes sometimes hard to make some of those good decisions. We've had models here as participating in the federated cooperative system, the whole principle of cooperatives working with cooperatives, where we had some business models where we used and maximized patronage earnings to a very high rate. And it really worked. It worked well. We had built some models around how do we manage the tax burden? How do we manage some non-member business? Because we were doing some things that really was very large and non-member business side. And so we had to manage the tax side of it. And we were pumping all of those patronage earnings back into the company and reinvested in other divisions for their growth. And like I said, it was very, very successful. I mean, we were spending tens of millions of dollars in capital expenditures to benefit the member. I mean, we built multiple greenfield grain elevator facilities. We built agronomy warehouse storage. We invested in mobile assets and mobile equipment to help distribution side in the supply chain. But there's a point where agriculture cycles always happen. And there's points where even the federated side of it may struggle and patronage earnings aren't reliable. And we experienced that here. And it takes some hard business model decisions to ensure, again, survivability of the enterprise. And that through all of that, I think the thing that you do have to focus on is local earnings at an enterprise level, but also at the departmental divisional level. Over the long run, as you mentioned, there are times where there's times where you'd get into cycles where, say, a grain versus agronomy may be in off cycles and one division struggles more than the other. And it doesn't mean you necessarily need to just bail and sell out the division per se, but you got to look and step back and say, hey, are these business models working? And for us, it really goes back into the mission statement we have today is just, are we cooperatively creating value? Are we doing things that matter for our members or are we not? And if we're not, we got to look at that really hard and say, what should we be doing? How should we be spending our members' resources in this? And those are hard transitions to really go from somewhat a reliance on patronage earnings that aren't controllable to reliance purely always on local earnings. My viewpoint is patronage is always the cherry on the top of the pie or the cake or whatever. We very much have focused here lately, since my tenure, but we got to control our own destiny. We can't rely on others for our own success. That doesn't mean we don't still become great partners with our vendors or other co-ops that we're involved with, things like that we don't have great relationships. But ultimately, we're here to serve our members and create value for them. And we just got to make sure we're doing that in ways that it's under our control, that we can influence that decision as much as we can for our members' benefit.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges is we often have this point of correction, that clarifying moment when the froth leaves the market, when the tailwind of, in this case, the federated co-op system patronage being paid out annually, whatever that tailwind, that beneficiary event might be. We sometimes don't realize that we've had drift until the event occurs, until the tailwind subsides. And I guess from your standpoint, so you have this idea around how do you make sure that every decision is filtered through. Are we creating value for the members? Is this something that is viable locally? But as you think about in the future, that cycle will return again, and there'll be times where there'll be abundant sort of windfall, almost profitability drop down upon the organization. I just wonder, how do you have the confidence and the assurance that that's always going to be in the front of every management team member's mind? I think even the most disciplined of us, the most rigorous thinkers, the most disciplined analysis, we still, I feel like it's very tempting to lose a little bit of the edge, lose a little bit of the focus, lose a little bit of the criticality on decisions and the precision on how we look at them. And so are there prompting questions that you that you use yourself or with your leadership team members? Are there behaviors that you found beneficial, or is it simply just every day trying to just get better at doing it and knowing you'll never be perfect?
Yeah, I think that has to come first, is that we know we'll never be perfect. That's that acceptance of that. But we're really trying to right now focus ourselves on strategic execution, and having practices in place, having, models that we're using to ensure we're staying where we need to be. We use the terminology all the time. We got to stay out of the ditch. We got to stay up on top of the road. But how do you know you're on that road? How do you know you're not weaving into the ditch and hitting the rumble strips? And that's where I think we have put so much focus on behaviors and culture and defining those behaviors and cultures, because my tenure for Garden City Co-op, I've seen lots of different things occur here, and that's just because of age and experience has allowed me to have that. But to your point, it is easy to get comfortable. It is easy to get off track when you're in those up cycles and you're not having to worry about things like liquidity or anything like that. It is easy to say yes to every project and to stretch your limits. But when things get rough, when the financial and economic situations don't allow for some of those same decisions, it's hard to not sometimes be the bad guy in the room and have to say no. And we've had to experience that here, and it's not fun. It's not easy, but we live in an area that has a lot of volatility from, just geographically because of weather and things like that, where we're located. And we just got to be reminded of that yes, you could be in a good time, but around the corner, just the cycle of agriculture is going to happen. It's going to down cycle again. You have to be making those hard decisions. And so we try to stay optimistic, but we try to stay grounded as well. And so we ask ourselves, just where are we at in these cycles? And, as we've previously talked, are these structural changes in cycles, or is this just a normal cycle due to supply and demand and economics? So we got to make sure we're doing that correctly. And I think it's just continue to survey the landscape around us. What do our members need? What do our farmers need? How are they changing? How are they evolving? Are we staying in front of them, whether it's speed, space, or services that we could offer? And understanding that we got to live within our means and within our balance sheets. Nobody's balance sheet is necessarily bulletproof. There's obviously some that are very, very strong, and there's some that are weak. But we put internal covenants on ourselves as well. Everybody gets covenants from the bank if you're loaning, borrowing money, things like that. But we try to put some own metrics internally around, financial covenants, and we try to do some around qualitative as well. But just to hold ourselves and measure ourselves to make sure we are doing the right things, and trying to have enough member engagement, member feedback to make sure that too, we're earning the business in the right way. I don't want to earn business just because we potentially are the cheapest or because some other competitor's not doing a good job. It's about us. Are we doing a good job? That kind of goes back to controlling our own destiny, to ensure that we're participating in the marketplace we want to and how we want to show up. And again, I just go back to that takes culture, which is really hard work because it's a lot about people. It's about keeping people pointed in the right direction and them understanding, why do we exist? What is our purpose? And just having to communicate that over and over and over. And I'm not saying we do a good job about that all the time either, but we are, to your point, incrementally every day trying to do something to reiterate those principles of who we are and why we are, so that people can understand, why do we make the decisions that we do.
Well, I really like that concept of the internal covenant and forcing some of that scrutiny within the four walls of the business. And even an interesting practice for folks that this either maybe doesn't feel familiar or feels very familiar upon year-end review, going back through the last year and just, it's not to diminish the result that you delivered, if it's a positive result you're proud of, but, looking and flagging, what were the things that perhaps benefited the business that are frankly outside of our control? And not just an up market.
Correct.
right? Not bullish prices on the commodities that you handle, but patronage from a federated co-op partner, one-time tax events, a lot of the things that would show up within an audited financials. But looking at that, saying, okay, if we were to adjust our year-end P&L basis, normalizing for these one-time events, what would that leave us with? And what would have been required for us to do or act or consider if that was the situation? And then you can actually say, okay, look, perhaps we have an obligation to act to correct some of these internal deficiencies or margin leakage or whatever it might be. That might be that sort of internally applied discipline and internal covenant, as you put it, to kind of even proactively consider these things, not waiting for that clarifying event of something going away. But changing direction here for a moment, Jeff, you talked about your tenure at Garden City Cooperative, which is, everyone has a unique story, right? Where none two of us are the same, but you do have, I would say, a non-normative path. And so, at a high level, in your more than 2 decades at Garden City, as I understand it from our previous conversations, you've had roles in agronomy, in operations, in energy, significant leadership in IT and technology, and leading a transformation of the organization. Subsequently moving into finance as the CFO, and ultimately into the CEO and roles where you've been since 2018. And I'm sure that I missed some stints along the way there, but you can already get a sense of how broad the exposure that career path is. And there's a couple different questions I have on that, but first and foremost, I guess the first question that come to mind is, with that kind of a multifunctional background and so many different tours of duty in different parts of the business, what value do you see that has delivered to the co-op today? I know it's given you personal value, but for the co-op, what's the value that it's delivered to the co-op along the way? And how has it helped you be effective in your role today as a CEO, where maybe you would have not been able to do certain things if you had not had that sort of diverse career path?
Yeah. I mean, my career path is definitely nothing I designed by any means. I was given opportunities. And as we spoke previously, I just always said yes to an opportunity. I never said no. I still have told multiple people, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. For me, I definitely classify myself as a generalist, jack of all trades, master of none. The benefit I feel like has given me more than anything is it allows me to have an enterprise view of this organization. And we very much have transitioned to trying to manage this company more from an enterprise level. We strategically decided quite a while ago that, we are one co-op. We happen to be in grain agronomy, energy, business profit centers today, but we're one co-op. And that's where we're trying to ensure that we have, at a macro level, one culture across the whole organization. I mean, we understand we have microcultures based on geography, departments, things like that, but try to have some underlying commonality across the whole company in some culture aspects. And so for me, what that career gave me is I get to understand, what is our farmer, what are their challenges, what are their needs, where we have opportunities to create value for them, again, from an enterprise level. How do grain agronomy, energy all impact and interact when we're dealing and working with a customer and trying to solve a problem? What it does require of me, though, is, I do try to surround myself with people that are the experts, people that do know those business lines that way better than me. I follow a model that was communicated by General Stanley McChrystal in the book Team of Teams. But my job is I'm the empathetic crafter of culture in this organization. And it's my job to ensure that the employees around me understand their purpose and their reason for being an employee here, and to ensure they have the resources that they need to be the most successful they can be in their roles. And so that career path allowed me to see many different aspects of this organization. As you mentioned, at a high level, I've been in grain agronomy, energy, and our shared services group. I've been in IT. I've been a CFO. And so over 24 years now here, I've got to see a lot of different things. I've been able to see cycles. You mentioned commodity prices. I remember when I was in our grain division writing checks for less than $1.90 for corn per bushel. Those weren't fun times. But I also remember the run-ups when commodity prices are more favorable. This is a cyclical business, and you got to be sure to be looking forward and ahead all the time. And it's where I say that enterprise view is what got me some of these opportunities. When we were going through the succession planning process with the board, when my previous general manager CEO retired, I think that's what benefited me to some degree, is I could have conversations in the boardroom as an internal candidate during my interview processes and everything to understand how this organization works. And I was very much benefited by my previous leadership to give me those opportunities. I had opportunities to be in the boardroom really early on in my career and to get exposure. And I just understand what it takes somewhat to be able to have those opportunities and to understand what they mean if you want to take advantage of them. And that's what we try to do with our talent here as well, is just try to pour into them the best we can so that they can be successful, whether they want to be a specialist or a generalist.
Yeah, you and I talked, we did an episode here maybe earlier this year, late last year, around the generalist versus specialist, sort of as a concept for talent. And as I look back, it was an imperfect sort of statement of the facts and the challenge, but sort of getting some ideas off the top of, getting them off my mind around, how different organizations might tackle this. And we've both had our own experiences. I think we're both probably wired as generalists more than specialists. I think for you, that's obviously played out very, very well. And I think about young talent now. One, I don't know if the younger generations, the way the education system is set up, the early declaration of majors, trying to get 3 internships. I don't even know if generalization is even an objective or even a possibility for them anymore. But if we lose that, if we lose the ability for folks, for talent in the business that are coming up to have that kind of broad exposure, yes, they create deeper technical knowledge of a specific area, and that's a lot of firepower in their lane. But there's a trade-off there. And so as you sit there today, do you want to replicate those kind of career paths for the next generation of talent in your business? And if you do, is it even possible? Because I'm operating from the assumption that it's a pretty difficult thing to do now, between people's hyper-focused education, between their probably well-crafted interest areas, generally lower appetite for mobility. Sometimes the broad exposure means you're going to have to move more often than you'd like. So I guess, what are your thoughts there? Is that even an objective for you to recreate this for younger talent? Or do you think about it, trying to structure it differently to give them broad exposure?
I think it's a great challenge. And I think it's a great challenge for this industry today. And I would say I'm still a little on the fence of, do I want that for, upcoming talent or not? I'm still almost challenging myself. Is it even possible first?
Right.
And I've kind of somewhat settled on that. I think it is possible, but I think you have to have the right environments, and it takes a lot of intentionality. You need a person that wants to strive for knowing more of a broader, wider swath of an industry versus as going in and, as you mentioned, just more of a specific area. And that person has to be willing to, like I said, for me, was always say yes. And so I think if you develop some very intentional career paths, development plans, and you have those opportunities created for an individual, I think it's possible. As you mentioned, there's risks and rewards to that. I think today, just current demographics of talent, mobility is high, in that if they want to go and move to, not necessarily move physically, but move to a different career path, a different organization, things like that, it is fairly simple to do that, to work and to not expect a long tenure in a role or commitment to an organization. And so I think there has to be some levels of transparency and agreement with an individual that was wanting to maybe have some interest in a generalist path to do that. And then for the organization to be very intentional about how are we going to structure this? What opportunities are we going to give? How do we set expectations for both sides to ensure that they know what we're doing and that they understand what part of a system for a development plan that they're in, and to be able to uphold that, because you can't per se promise anything in this environment of, from a talent management. And I think there's a matter of scale. Where does it apply? Does an organization that's maybe hyper local, really good at what they're doing, those opportunities may not all exist in that kind of an organization. Where you get to a scale up to a very large organization that's maybe very large geography, maybe better opportunities for those to occur from a career path.
Right.
And I think there's trade-offs. I don't think there's risks and opportunities, rewards for both paths. I think both paths have value. And so I don't think it's a right or wrong kind of question. It's just, what is the desire for the organization? What's the desire for the individual in their career paths? I do think we're setting people up today for more of a specialized versus a generalist path. But all molds can be broken. It's just, how stubborn and how good are we at executing on those paths?
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
Well, you just said mold, and I was thinking in terms of career lanes calcifying and becoming too firm. It's almost as if, don't assume you can go to market and find early career, just raw, really strong, high potential talent that has the appetite to be a generalist. Like, that's a pretty hard thing to say, we need to go out and find this.
Yes, I agree.
Should it happen to walk through the door, even if your organization is well structured around these molds of what profiles and career lanes look like, if you get someone in there that actually has the bandwidth, the agility, and the desire and willingness to try to fit into multiple molds, I think you need to maintain that kind of organizational leadership agility to say, look, we're going to make some opportunistic adaptations to our process in the interests of investing in this individual or these groups of individuals, because we think that the risk of breaking process might be far less than the potential rewards of kind of outsized growth of this individual and what they could do for the co-op in the future. So I do think that I think we've conditioned folks to want to specialize and to find safety in the specialization, right? Yeah, being a generalist requires a heck of a lot more comfort with ambiguity, and we get enough ambiguity just opening up your news app of choice in the morning, right? There's enough chaos that you consume before you even brush your teeth. You don't necessarily need to have it from 9 to 5 at the office. And so, but I think we need to stay open to this.
And that's where I would say the ability to stay open is rooted in the organization has to do a good job of understanding what are the skills and competencies that roles require. And not just what they require today, but what do they maybe require in the future? Mm-hmm. And pairing those personalities, those people that have those kinds of competencies up with roles that allow for some organic growth, but ambiguity as well, because if these processes, as we're saying, we're trying to break them or we're trying to fit a round peg into a square hole on purpose to cause good disruption and good conflict, that the competencies of those individuals need to apply to that so that we're not setting somebody up for failure. If we're wanting to go down that generalist path, I think there is value there for the organizations because again, it helps from an enterprise view. It helps for understanding different viewpoints and ensuring that there's diversity of thought to get the best ideas out there.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes a personality set that's from somebody that has the confidence and is driven and just exhibits a skill set that allows them to fit into that structure so that they can go and be successful, because you want to set some people up for success, not for failure.
Well, and to that point, setting folks up for success, another thing I wanted to sort of highlight and get your thoughts on is, Garden City Co-op has a pretty strong track record, particularly recently, of being a net exporter of talent. So you have, and you shared the numbers with me in a prior conversation we had, and I don't have them here handy. You can disclose them if you like, but there's been a large number of folks, meaningful contributors at high levels in your organization, that have left to land in some pretty big and impactful jobs elsewhere in the industry, which of course it hurts to lose top talent. But what an endorsement of the talent development culture and kind of just the overall performance processes you have if your people are leaving to lead other organizations, right? It's the ultimate endorsement that you're doing something right. And I guess my question to you is, you've talked a lot about building the culture and business that can do that. I think that's, coming into focus for our listeners. But I guess as an executive, and this is maybe spin, well, we're losing all these people, but they're landing in good jobs, right? Don't worry about it. Well, you do have to worry about it because you got to fill those darn roles. And so, how do you manage that attrition of strong talent and still filling the roles that you need in-house and making sure that multiple levels down in the organization, folks are going to be ready to step up? What have you observed or done, or would you share with the listeners that you think would resonate elsewhere?
Yeah. And we've been very attractive for other recruiters and other people to come look at our talent and try to place them in other organizations. And we have been, somewhat successful in developing talent here. And that's across all divisions. That's across all roles within the organization, up and down the org chart. As you mentioned, there has been a recency. In the last 10 years, this organization has created 7 CEOs for other cooperative organizations.
Let's just pause on that for a second. And over the last how many years did you say?
Over the last 10 years, there have been 7 CEOs come from this organization.
So that again, just to put a proverbial cherry, the federated patronage back on the Sunday here. That is the number we're talking about. To export 7 chief executives within a decade is notable. I'm so sorry. Please continue.
It's fine. Part of that is just, it's the organization as its history. This company has been around for 100 plus years, and there's just some cultural expectations. There are some bars that are set for what we expect for talent and development and people. And we've had some strong personalities driving some really strong, productive things here. And that is partially, I think, just the geography that we live in the Western High Plains out here. This geography pushes and makes you have to succeed to survive. And so we've had board members, we've had farmers, just had national impact out of this organization. So I give a lot of credit to my predecessors. That's where a lot of this comes from, because everybody prior sets the next one up for success. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do here, is the same thing, is set the next people up for success, because we never know how long, our tenures are going to last. And so just try to make the best impact that we can and invest in our people. And that's what some of the previous management has done here, is there was a lot of investment in people. And I'm one of those 7 that we mentioned, in that I was really invested in my education and my experience and my exposure to be able to have these opportunities. And it's up to us to step up and execute, and to try to do a good job. But that does create turnover, and you watch your retention stats and all that stuff. But for me, how I have handled those transitions is you're always caring about succession plannings. We care about strategic talent planning processes. For multiple years, we go through processes every year and we review, where is our talent pool at internally? What are we missing? What gaps do we have? What risks do we have for somebody leaving the organization? And what impact would that loss of that talent create to this organization? So that allows us to know, where do we need to focus? And so we try to be intentional about it. I'm not saying we're good, but we try to be intentional with those processes in talent management. And I would just add too, sometimes you don't have the talent internally ready, or it's not available yet. And you do have to go outside the organization. And so you try to attract a talent that fulfills the role for what the role needs for the future. We don't need to replace people. We don't need to carbon copy people, because this industry is just changing so fast. We need talent that's got a mindset that says, hey, here's what we need to be doing for the future. And I look at it when I go through the interview processes myself, if I'm needing to replace talent or others in the organization, and say, do we have the opportunity to upgrade? Do we have the opportunity to be better? That doesn't mean the previous person that left wasn't good or wasn't successful in their role. It's just, we need to challenge ourselves to always be getting better. And so can we find talent that levels us up again and does invest in the new people again? Because that's what it creates when you are looked at as resources for other organizations. Is there is turnover. It can be very painful. But this organization has to continue to move forward, and we have to continue to provide that value for our membership. And we feel like we provide a lot of value purely through our talent and our expertise to our farmers. And so whether that's internally sourced or externally sourced, we look to upgrade ourselves all the time, and to understand those skills and competency needs, and to understand, what does the future need? What challenges are we going to face? What do we need to get through? Because this industry is just changing so fast that agility is so critical. And that includes the talent going forward.
And therein lies almost the emotional endurance challenge of it all. Is every time there is the exhaustion of another announcement of someone is deciding to leave the organization, to go move into an exciting opportunity that simply is not or won't be available within your company, right? Yep. Oftentimes that's what it is. It's just opportunity scarcity.
Yeah, they are opportunities. And the other thing I would add to that opportunity is, I never want to stand in front of an employee going to be better at a different organization. If it's what's best for them, I'm going to encourage them to go be better for themselves.
And I think that's the secondary point there is, even in the moment where you're thinking immediately of, my goodness, we've lost this strong performer, this head of this department, this holder of institutional knowledge, the leader of these initiatives, the time it's going to take to find a replacement, all the things that flood into your mind when you get that notification, but also recalibrating around, we need to constantly reassess the roles and requirements anyways. And a vacancy creates the opportunity for us to think more broadly than anything else. It's very hard to try to retrofit an existing person into a profile of what you need if they simply don't have those attributes. And so it is healthy, but it is challenging. Kind of related to talent, Jeff, and frankly through an augmentation amplification of the impact of talent. You spent a lot of time. Much of your tenure was in the IT and technology space, of course, and leading a lot of transformations around the infrastructure and the processes and the digital enablement of the co-op. And so right now we're in year 3 of this, or maybe even going into the end of year 4 of the age of AI, and not just the retail LLMs, but all the enterprise solutions and things that run in the background that AI enables. With your experience both in the IT and technology side, as well as your experience now sitting as the CEO, how are you thinking about AI within the cooperative? Everything from, what are some of the promising use cases that you think are interesting to sort of intellectually chew on, to maybe what are some of the limitations, be it technology, capital, people's willingness to learn and change. Just kind of open-ended question there. How do you think about AI for Garden City Co-op?
I think it's very exciting as an opportunity, but it is changing, and it is moving so fast. We're trying to chase a moving target a little bit as well. I think the technology at its root is going to be extremely transformational to us as an organization, as an industry, and as a society. The infrastructure needs to enable this are really going to affect rural America as well. And whether or not we can compete on a global level around the usage and adoption of this technology, just because it takes huge data centers, and these data centers are being built in rural America. They're not going to be built in urban areas just because of access to electricity and water and different things. But from an organization perspective, I would say we're intentionally trying to use and adopt AI and to take advantage of its benefits. I would also say we're early on in that adoption curve. And part of that reason is there's a lot that goes into just saying, hey, we're going to use AI. You have to decide what platforms are going to use. The thing that I think for me that is most concerning and what we're trying to manage through first is the governance of the technology and of these models. The ability to take intellectual property, personal identifiable information, things like that, and that to be not managed appropriately is very easy. So we're really focused first on the governance side internally. But we are using some tools and some aspects of the technology to try to get better. I think there always is that concern and that conversation out there about it replacing people or replacing talent. And I think there's going to be some level of aspect of that occurring. But I have the viewpoint of those that can utilize it and have it complement their roles and functions are the ones that are going to win. It's not always going to replace. It's about utilizing the technology for the individual talent to be even better. And so that's kind of what we're trying to go down. There are things, from a clerical aspect, an accounting aspect, things like that I believe it's going to have the impact first on for us and what we're seeing. Because you can do the content generation and you can have it help, write your email a little better, or change your tone, some of the, what I would call low-hanging fruit aspects of the technology. But there's also other aspects that I think it's going to really revolutionize things and help us be even more efficient. I don't know when and the timing of when those all apply. Today, we still need an employee to open a rail car, load the rail car on a unit train, as an example. But that's not always potentially going to be the case. I do see, though, as humans still going to be involved in the controls aspect. And that's where I see AI complementing, but also having a place for observation by the talent is the efficiencies that you can gain in your controls to ensure, hey, did the process occur the way it was supposed to? Was there a variance? Is there something we need to learn from by it is showing the anomaly that occurred? And that could be applied again in grain agronomy, energy, back office. There's an application, I think, for it. And so we're trying to be intentional in that journey here as well. I do think it's going to capture some efficiencies out there. I think the ability to customize services to individuals will be easier to do because of it. And so I think you have to be on the train. You don't have to be bleeding edge, cutting edge per se, but you need to be having some kind of process and plan in place to understand how is it going to affect the organization? How is the organization going to use and adopt it? And so we've got people internally here that is their focus. We are trying to revolutionize our IT infrastructure and how we utilize it as an internal resource, because it is going to require different things than what we did in the past. When I was leading our group, I had access to all kinds of tools and things too, and was able to adopt and to really change some of our processes. And some of that stuff's almost outdated today. And so it takes, when we think about talent, it takes new talent to look at this, to adopt it, to not be scared of it, to respect the technology, but to know, hey, this could fit in this process or this piece of organization. Let's do that. Let's experiment so that we can take advantage of the opportunities, And so I think it's going to help drive revenue and it's going to help reduce costs. And so I think there's value in the investment in the long run.
Yeah, and I think from a everyone does, very quickly. And I think this is not maybe where you were thinking, but you're more responding to what a lot of folks would be assuming is, it goes to the labor arbitrage component, right? Is this going to be a destroyer and a wipeout of jobs? Well, in the ag industry, it probably doesn't wipe out jobs. It probably becomes the equalizer of the talent deficit environment that we're in, right? We simply want to get to parity where we can economically run the business, knowing that we're probably shorter hands than we'd like to be or have been historically. But you said some interesting things there I think are really important. I want to call out is the idea around establishing your own internal governance and guardrails. Because things are moving so fast, it's still tough to know what you can trust to the hyperscalers and to the frontier models that are out there. So within my business, the technology, the platforms that we use outside of LLMs, we make sure there's no third-party training on the data, right? So stuff that we use is captured within that software. It is firewalled and secured and is not then sold out for further training purposes. Now, even in addition to that, we also anonymize anytime we're going to be doing large data set analyses. It's always anonymized to make sure that individuals and locations and company names, et cetera, are not disclosed. That's something that we just do as a matter of practice, because until we have assurance to the contrary, and I want to believe people, I don't necessarily know that I put all my trust in the tech oligarchs that are running the AI frontier models. That's just what we do. But then once you get past that, one of the big unlocks for me and some of the folks that I work with is looking for low sophistication, high impact uses and just experimenting. And it hasn't come out yet, but we recorded an episode here recently where we talk about some of those exactly like low sophistication, high impact use cases that just came from asking the question, I wonder if AI could help me do this. So opposed to having a grandiose AI strategy, where we're going to use AI to fundamentally change this part of our business, first we just look at the work that we already have to do and say, could AI help us do this work? Because sometimes, usually the answer is yes, it can.
Yep, that's correct.
That's not the unlock. The unlock is the next 5 ideas you have of like, oh, I had no idea that it could do what I asked it, plus revealed to me these 3 things. Now let's go set it loose on these other problems. And that's kind of where it's that flywheel starts of just the new ideation and use cases. And so, but I think it all has to be, to your point, Jeff, it has to be rooted in some internal governance and guardrails that are owned within your organization, because I'm not at a place personally where I'm ready to outsource that trust to the technology providers just yet. And I agree. I think it's going to be, a dramatic impact of course. The timing, that's a speculation market of when the timing is, but a net benefit to the industry. A final topic I wanted to run by you here, and there's no sort of natural transition here, but this is something you and I talked about in a prior conversation. It's born of the idea of sometimes someone just needs to say the uncomfortable thing out loud and posit a crazy idea to get a reaction. But at the top of the conversation, we were talking about subsidization risk and needing to maintain the focus of, despite whatever the headline number is you print at the end of the year, looking at the businesses and say, is this a business that we should be in? Right? I think you talked about that in the context of like a feed business or something like that. Ag and multi-line co-ops are in very asset intensive or asset heavy, capital intensive, high hands-on analog people management requirements. It's a very tough business to be in. It prevents scale, it reduces margin, it increases operating costs, insurance costs, financing costs, all these things. And you and I were talking, and you just said, well, we need to start to imagine, what does the asset-free cooperative of the future look like? And it's a shame that we're getting into this here in the last couple minutes. That probably should be the whole episode. Maybe that'll be your return visit if we get a strong enough reaction to this last topic here. But, what does that mean? I think it's a great idea to start to posit out there as, what would an asset-free cooperative look like in the future? What problems does that solve? And how might that drive member value to the farmers? And let's let you take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's rooted in the business model, because as a cooperative, as an agriculture cooperative, we're owned by our farmers. and I've mentioned, I mean, there's some things that are magical about the cooperative ownership model, but there's also things, it's just another business model. And our job is to exist to, again, create value for our members, for our customers. And, I've mentioned this industry is dramatically changing. And our farmers are a large driver of that. Farmer consolidation, the growth and the scale that these farmers are getting to, allows them to do things that the traditional co-op just used to do on their own for the farmers. We have farmers that are getting to the size and scale of co-ops. And so that co-op has to sit there and decide, okay, what is my future? What am I going to do? What is my role in this supply chain? Because we see the supply chain just getting squeezed as well, and the consolidation across it, whether that is a grain agronomy, energy feed, whoever, line of business that it's operating in, consolidation is real. And so I think from a governance perspective of the business, so the board and the membership and the staff looking at what is the strategic value long term, there's some aspects of, do you stand in front of the freight train and get rolled over, or do you get on and ride with it? Because there is change occurring. It's just, we don't know how fast that train is moving yet, but you still have to make strategic decisions. And so I envision a place, a world, and I don't know if this is 100 years down the road, if this is in 10, 15 years because of the pace of change, where the co-op has to be agile enough and make those strategic, hard and governance decisions well enough to say, where is my best opportunity to create value? And as I mentioned, as farmers get larger and the demographics changes happen with the age of the farmer and all the different succession plans and the transitions of land ownership, these farmers have capabilities today that are the equal or even better than the ag retail side. And so what role does that ag retail, that grain space hold? And I think there's a progression in the long run where you could almost envision a world where the co-op is a virtual co-op. It is there to help just connect the supply chain for the customers and for the end users, the exporters, or whoever it needs to be. And in that world, again, it's virtual. They don't own the assets anymore. Maybe the farmer owns the assets and they can load their own trains. And there's a scale of an organization that owns the export market and provides the 12-month-a-year grain supply to somebody in a foreign country. And that there's somebody just in that middle that says, hey, here's the opportunities to market or to buy. I'm going to connect you with this other side of the supply chain. And that virtual co-op is there to provide the exact same thing that a lot of these co-ops were there to provide 100 years ago. They're there to connect the people to the supply chain and provide those services and aspects that they couldn't do on their own. And the virtual co-op doesn't own assets. It's just about people and talent and expertise and being able to develop and create relationships that enable the supply chain and the grain flows and the inputs to flow where they need to. And again, I get it. That's throwing stuff at the wall. We don't know if that's where it's really going to go or how fast it'll get there. But if we don't start thinking radically about how should this business model look like in the long run, you're just going to stick your head in the sand and get run over. You got to be thinking of things today and being able to react and to be agile enough today to be ready for the next 5 years, to be ready for the next 10 years, and to continue to evolve and to evaluate. Where should we be? How should we be doing these things? Because it's, again, about a member engagement and ensuring we're creating value. Because I've been a large proponent. If we're not capable of creating value, we do not need to exist. Because there's no economic benefit, there's no market benefit, there's no presence benefit in the supply chain. Just that existence value doesn't exist if we're not able to be smart enough and creative enough to create that value.
So thank you for that. I think it's very wisely said. And there's a lot of literature and examples throughout history that prove out your point. So the through line there is you're thinking about our core purpose is connecting our farmers to the supply chains. When you define your purpose in those terms, it no longer presumes you have to originate grain. It no longer presumes you have to manage a physical fertilizer position. It no longer presumes that you have to have staff of sales agronomists. Now, you might choose to have all those things if that's where the opportunity to connect the supply chain to the farmers is, but it doesn't presume it. So it starts from the original problem to solve and works back. It's the reason railroads got into trouble a couple hundred years ago. They thought they were in the railroad business. They're in the transportation business. It's one of the reasons I would argue that, modern companies that have high valuations like Tesla is not an electric car business. It's a renewable energy business. They've got, solar panels and lots of other things going on, right? So it's a broad problem to solve, and then you choose the application to drive it forward. And I think when you have that kind of a mindset, Jeff, you do set yourself up to kind of reinvent and adapt and kind of lean into the uncomfortable ideas. Upright storage might be a matter of necessity, might be a problem of inertia in the future. We simply presume we have to own it because we always have. And so I think that's a really great way of looking at it. And I think that's a good place for us to leave it today. Jeff, I really enjoyed our prior conversations. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. I just can't thank you enough.
No, I very much appreciate being on, Joe. Thank you.
You bet. And to our listeners, thank you as always for joining us today. I appreciate you being part of the Pacesetter Pod community and taking time to listen in and consider new ways to turn strategy into outcomes in your agribusiness. Thanks for joining. I look forward to having you next time right here on the Pacesetter Pod.
This is the podcastfactory.com.